Welcome to Amplify. I'm your host, Candice Dormon. On this show, we shine a light on people making moves, grinding, hustling, and being excellent because it's 2020 and there are still a lot of first and onlys across almost every industry. So let's dig in. Our guest today is the founder and career coach of Propel on Purpose Coaching. As an immigrant, woman of color, and first-generation college graduate from a working-class community, she created pop coaching to empower the career development and economic mobility of professionals with similar backgrounds and experiences, the first-gen, underrepresented faces of corporate America. Pop coaching is her way of fulfilling her own purpose to create an inclusive and equitable society of people who are happy deep down in their soul because they work, lead, and live on purpose. Anyelis, welcome to Amplify. Hi. You're so fancy.
It's so great to be here. Thank you so much for that intro. Oh my goodness. And I just love the name and what this podcast stands for. Amazing.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad that you're here. I've been looking forward to this interview for a while now, and I'm just so glad that you're here. So thank you so much, Anyelis.
Of course. Thank you for having me. I'm honored.
So let's just it's one of those things where you hear someone talking about you and you're like, wait, is that me? Is
right.
Like,
that's
yes,
what I felt like.
You are the bomb. You're a badass. So why don't we just jump right in? Why don't you tell us a little bit about Propel on Purpose and how you started this business?
Sure, I'd love to. So I'll start by actually just telling you my story, which you mentioned a little bit in the intro, which is fabulous. I think there's something about your voice that, just gives that intro a little bit of a pop.
Thank you.
So of course. So I was born in Cuba and I came to this country when I was 4 years old with my mom. We had no family here. And by the grace of God and some really generous families, we eventually had our own home, an apartment. We didn't have an actual home, but we had our own apartment because initially we lived with a couple of different families. And so I grew up in a predominantly Hispanic community, working class. I didn't know that I was a minority, or that, this other world existed beyond Union City, New Jersey. It was home. People looked like me. They spoke the same language. They ate the same foods, So I had a very limited view of the world up until I went to college. And luckily, I went to a really great public high school that encouraged us to go to college. And I was a nerdy kid. So, I knew that education was the next step. That's what I was told. I went to college. I went to a very white and wealthy private liberal arts college in the second wealthiest county in New Jersey. And it was the first time in my life where I realized that I was a minority. And I mean, I knew that growing up, we didn't have a lot, and we had challenges and struggles, but I didn't realize what disparities were, income disparities and those kinds of differences. And so college was really the first time where, I was learning in the textbooks about inequities, and I was experiencing it myself by, going to school with people that were driving BMWs. Meanwhile, we didn't even own a car. And so I went through college. I had no idea what I wanted to pursue as a career. I was a student. So I picked a major that was interesting to me. I ended up picking behavioral sciences, so psychology, sociology, and anthropology. And simply because I enjoy learning about human behavior and why people do the things that they do, what makes us tick. And when I graduated, again, I had no idea how that translated into a career, even though I had done, a few internships. I graduated and I started working for a nonprofit organization in the city of Newark. And that happened through a connection from someone who was an alumni from college. And I simply went towards that direction because I wanted to help people. I wanted to save the world, one woman at a time.
Right.
And it felt, and I had I was given a $40,000 salary, which to me was like, oh my goodness, I made it. No one in my family had ever made that much money. And so I started this career. It was a very gratifying job for the first 2 years. And then I realized there wasn't enough mobility in the nonprofit organization. I was a one-woman show, under-resourced, underfunded. And as an ambitious, overachiever, I knew that wasn't it for me. That wasn't it for my career. I needed to find something else, but I really struggled. I didn't know what that something else was. And so I felt very stuck and very unhappy and confused about what next career to pursue. I stayed there for 4 years, probably 2 years too long. And I tried going to grad school. I took a couple of classes. I again, very confused, unsure of what I wanted to do. Eventually, the program that I managed was defunded by the new governor of the state. And so I knew in advance that I was going to be downsized. No time like knowing that news to figure it out. So it's like, all right, I have no choice but to really figure out what to do next this time. And so I started to have conversations with different mentors and, people that I went to college with that were a little bit older who, had really great careers. And one of them, my friend Sabrina, she worked in HR, and she would always tell me, you should consider a career in HR. I think you'd do really well. And, I had a very limited perception of HR. So I thought, those are the people that want to write me up if I'm late to work. They do benefits and compensation. I'm not interested. And she was like, no, there's a whole other world of HR that you would love. And so I started to do my research. And long story short, I pursued a master's in HR management while I was downsized. So I knew I was going to lose my job in July. And I started school, a few weeks after that. And I did a 1 year master of HR management. I completed that. And then I just literally put my resume out there. And the first company that called me, I said, well, I've been out of a job for a year. I will just figure it out. Right. And that's how I got started in corporate America. And so that was my former organization. I worked there for 4 years. I tried a number of different roles, again, trying to figure out what kind of, I know this isn't it. So even though the role that I started, it was like, I just need an in, and then I will work my way through the organization. And I tried a number of different things, and it was like, this isn't it. This isn't it. This isn't why I got a master's. Like, I don't want to be doing this kind of transactional administrative work. Fast forward to 4 years in that organization, as one of very few people of color, and even though HR is female dominated, in that particular organization, the leadership was all male, all white male, right? With the exception of very few people. And so I looked around and I looked up and I didn't see representation. And I continued to be passed over for promotions. And, 4 years in, I didn't receive a single raise. The bonuses were low. So I knew that it was time to leave that organization. I had landed in the right team, the right manager, the right role, but it was no longer the right company. And luckily, opportunity is when, what's the quote? Luck is when opportunity meets preparation. I was ready and I was prepared, and life happened. My manager at the time got married, went on her honeymoon, came back and decided to resign. Because she had it too. She was like, I'm done with this organization, undervalued, underpaid. I don't have another job. But my husband said, I can't keep complaining about work. I can't keep complaining about work now that we're married. And she was really the catalyst for me moving to the organization where I work now. So I work in corporate America still. I have a full-time job. I manage a leadership development program. And when I transitioned over to this organization, again, I started in a number of different roles, but by then I knew everything clicked really quickly once I arrived at this organization, partially because it was the right culture and one in which I could thrive, and I had great leaders and mentors right away. And so I tried a number of different positions. In 4 years, I've managed to have 3 promotions, or 2 promotions, one being a 2-level promotion. And then 2 years ago, I landed at this job, which I consider to be the dream job for right now, because I love managing this leadership development program, having an imprint in the lives of early talent. This is their first job out of college, and It's my job to make sure that they're successful, and having an imprint in their career is really meaningful. And so when I landed in this job 2 years ago, of course, the overachiever in me said, well, you can't just have your full-time job. Now that you have arrived and you know what you're doing, it's about time you launch that career coaching business you've been talking about for the last 10 years.
Wow.
So while I was very confused and very, feeling all of this anxiety and anxiousness because I didn't know what I wanted to do, in the back of my mind, I thought, what if I coach people? Like, life coaching wasn't as big of a thing as it is now. Like, Marie Furlow wasn't as big as she is now.
Yeah.
And so in the back of my mind, I thought, I wanted to do coaching, but I felt like I can't coach someone else because I haven't figured it out yet. So I need to go through the process myself before I can tell anybody what to do, right?
Right.
And so when I arrived at my dream job, I said, well, this is it. Now I have figured it out. I know the process. I know what it takes. And I really want to empower other people to do the same thing, because it can be very overwhelming when you're a first generation college student or graduate professional and a person of color and someone who grows up in a working class community where you don't have these role models and mentors and people who can help you navigate college, and then once you get through college, to help you navigate your career. So no one in my family and none of my friends' family members worked in corporate America, so there wasn't anyone that I could ask for advice or guidance. And so that's why I launched Propel on Purpose Coaching. And as you mentioned in your wonderful intro, it's really about propelling people to pursue careers that are aligned with their life's purpose. So it's not just about having a job and being well paid. You can be very well paid, but also have a lot of meaning and joy in the thing that you do every day, in the place where you spend most of your time. So that's top coaching for you.
That is incredible. Okay. I really enjoy that story. I saw your post today about owning your story. And if that's not the most perfect, like, wrap up of, 30 some odd years and a flight and, like, all of the things, like, I think that the first step here is to really know who you are. And even though it takes a little while sometimes to figure out who that person is, that once you figure out who you are and can tell people who you are, like you just did, it makes it so much easier for you to, like, navigate the ship that is you. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
love
and
that.
and we have to control our own narrative, otherwise someone else will, and someone else
Absolutely.
might do it with less grace and not the best intentions. So
Real. That's so real. So you talked a lot about figuring out who you were, and feeling like you needed to figure out who you were in order to help other people, right? Which is is like a woman thing, definitely a woman of color thing. Just it's a little bit of imposter syndrome, right? That I can't possibly, even with all the things that I've done to get to this point, I can't possibly tell other people how to do it, right?
Yep.
We undervalue our experience because we don't have the title yet, or we don't have
Yep.
the whatever the thing is. What is it that people get wrong when thinking about their dream job, or thinking about what it is that they want to do? Why is it so hard for us to get to that point?
I love this question. And the first thing is that there is no dream job. There is not one dream job. So I said I have the dream job for right now, and that's true, but there isn't that. It's a misnomer to think that there is one thing that you can do for the rest of your life. That doesn't exist anymore. Careers are not linear anymore. We are not working for companies for 15, 20, 30 years as maybe we used to do in the past. In fact, there's a statistic that says something that around we change careers, not just jobs, careers 17 times throughout our lifetime. And
Wow.
so isn't that crazy? And so we're taught to go to school and pick a major, and that major is going to lead to a career. And then we expect to follow this very linear path, but that's just not how it works anymore. And the reality is that who you are changes. It's an evolution, And therefore your interests and the things that as you build more skills, you also want to expand your work portfolio. Nobody wants to do the same job for even 5 years at most. Like you do a job for 5 years and you sort of feel like you're pigeonholed. Not to say that there isn't value in being a subject matter expertise, but you can be a subject matter expertise in something and use those skills and transfer them to a different organization, to a different company, to a different cause. And so the first thing that people get wrong is that they need to have it figured out and that they are going for this one dream job. Because that just doesn't exist anymore. That's not the way the world works. And this idea of climbing the corporate ladder, I think, is also an old-fashioned way of thinking about it. So I would even argue that there is no corporate ladder anymore. Sheryl Sandberg calls it a jungle gym, and I think that's more accurate, right? Where you're kind of like moving around, and that certainly has been my experience, where I tried different roles. And fun fact, I've actually never had a role for more than 2 years, and I make 2 years in this role next week. So we shall see.
I can identify with that as well. I'm probably on career number 5 right now. So
see. So the first thing is that we have to start reframing how we think about careers and dream jobs, because it's an evolution, and also how we define success. This idea that upward mobility is tied to success. Yes, we want to, again, be well paid and we want to be developed and grow, but we can grow in different ways. You can attain mobility and you can obtain growth by growing your skills, by growing your knowledge, by learning a completely different industry. And really, success to me is getting to a career that brings you a lot of joy, a lot of meaning, that every day you feel challenged in a good way, that you're working with smart, collaborative people that care about you as a person, not just as a colleague, that you are working for an organization whose culture, whose values and missions, like, you can get behind. So as an example, my previous employer, where I struggled, their mission was, and their customer base was high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals. And essentially they were making rich people richer. And it was like, how do I work here? I grew up poor. I don't understand. It's hard to get behind this mission, right? Whereas the organization where I work now, they were started over 140 something years ago with the mission of helping the average person obtain financial freedom and wellness. And that's a mission I can get behind. That's a mission that I can get excited about coming to work every day. And so the dream job is situational, it's an evolution, and you really have to do the work to figure it out. You have to go through the process of, again, finding, like you mentioned, figuring out who you are, what makes you happy, and then what you're really good at. And as for this idea of purpose and a calling, I want to call out a distinction, which is that people often tell us to pursue our passion. And I think that is the worst advice. The worst advice, because there are very few people who inherently know what they're really good at and what they really enjoy. In fact, I have one friend who knew since childhood, and we've known each other since first grade, he knew then that he wanted to be an architect. And he went to school. He went to a USC, who has a top program in architecture. He graduated. He came to New York City and pursued an architecture degree. By the way, he's not an architect anymore. Now he manages a construction site. So two things. One, very few people know from very little that they have this knack or this passion that they want to pursue. And even those that do, they end up changing careers too. And so to tell people, oh, just follow your passion, it implies that we know that already. And I don't think that that's true. I think that's very much an evolution and a process. You have to do things and you have to try different things in order to know what you like, what you enjoy, what you're good at. And there's a book called Be So Great They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. And he says, people people develop a passion once they become really good at something, and other people find value and they continue to hone their skills. So it's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
you're really good at project management. And so then I become better at project management. And then all of a sudden I have a passion for project management.
Right.
And that's because I've developed these really great, valuable skills, not because you know, I knew that I wanted to be a project manager.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that passion and purpose are not correlated and they're not intertwined, but to me, passion is about interests. It's about things that you enjoy doing, whereas purpose is about intention and it's about having a greater impact on something bigger than you.
Mm.
Um, you know what I mean? So, like, what are you passionate
Absolutely.
about?
What am I passionate about?
Yeah. What?
I am passionate about giving people the opportunity to talk about what makes them happy, right?
Yeah.
Because you can always see, like, it's so clear when you talk to someone like we're doing right now. When
Hmm.
I zoom in on you and you were talking about your story, you're telling your story, you're telling about how you started this business and why you started this business, your face glows, right? Your
Hmm.
whole everything lights up. And
Hmm.
that it's it's just what you were talking about. It's like a feedback loop that you
Yeah.
end up falling into without you even knowing it, is that
Mhm.
you do something, you get some good feedback, it feels good, you do it again,
Mhm.
right? It's like the
Mhm.
most basic thing, the most
Yep.
basic biological thing that we can all do. But it's really hard to get that feedback
Mhm.
loop going if you don't get
Mhm.
the feedback, right?
Mhm.
If you're just going, you're doing and you look up and nobody
Mhm.
sees you and nobody says anything
Yeah.
and nobody is there to share the wins with you or to give you some
Yeah.
encouragement when you might fall down or to tell you how awesome you are, right? If you don't get those things, then it's hard to keep going. And
Mhm.
I know how important it is to me, even though, I struggle with imposter syndrome all the time. It's hard to get the compliment, but when you get it, you like absorb it. And
Mhm.
even though you might shake it off in the moment and you might go, oh, but I still need work here, or I still blah, 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 it still feeds you in a way that makes you push forward. And
Mhm.
so that's what I am passionate about. And what I have realized over the last several years that I am passionate about that I didn't know before. And
Mhm.
sometimes it takes a little bit of time before you recognize that you always end up in the role where you're talking to people, where you're pushing people forward,
Mhm.
where you're convincing them to try a new thing. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and then you turn around, like you said, and all of a sudden you're in project management. You're all excited about project management, but that's like not what you thought you would be
Yeah.
doing.
Yeah.
So it makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense. It makes a lot of sense. As we sort of talk about, like I mentioned imposter syndrome, it is a thing that is so deeply rooted in women, in people of color, in people like first generation. I've heard
Mhm.
you mention something from Shonda Rhimes, which is first, only, and different. Please talk a
Mhm.
little bit about that, because
Yeah.
I didn't even know that those were the words. Like sometimes you hear the words and you're like, oh, that's it, you got
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about how we get through this imposter syndrome when we have so many of those first, only, and difference, so that we
Mhm.
can really reach our potential and reach, and figure out what it is that we want to do.
Yeah. Absolutely. And thank you for sharing your passion. First of all, so I would say that you're pursuing your purpose because you have found something that gives you a lot of meaning and joy, but it also has a greater impact. So again, sometimes passion can be just about what interests us, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to have a greater impact on other people. Um, for example, I'm passionate about brunch. I love brunch. I would go to brunch every day if I could. I love the idea of breaking bread in the middle of the afternoon with my loved ones, but I'm not going to make a career out of brunching or owning a restaurant, like that's not what I want to do. That's just for pure enjoyment. Whereas, bringing people together over brunch to talk about their careers, that's a combination of passion and purpose. But I think what you did
Ah.
so well is that you've recognized your purpose, but that's ignited by a high interest. So that's what I mean by them being
Mm.
correlated, but telling people solely to pursue their passion is a little bit dangerous.
Right.
um, because there's a lot of things that we could be interested in. And the other thing is that sometimes when people hear pursue your passion, if you're a really creative person, like you're a writer or a calligraphist or a painter, if you pursue that for money, all of a sudden you feel that pressure to produce for the sake
Mhm.
of making a living, and then your creativity gets depleted. And so that's why I think it's terrible advice to tell people to just pursue their passion.
Yeah,
I
it
think
makes
it's more
sense.
about find the thing that gives you joy, but that also makes an impact and that you're good at and that you can be paid really well to do.
That is the thing, the third piece, right? So the thing you're interested in, the thing that you can make an impact in, and the thing people will pay you to do, right? Like
Hmm.
how you figure out how to make all, sometimes you have one of the three or two of the
Hmm.
three. And you're just like
Yeah.
hoping for the next one to come. And whether that's impact and payment, or passion and payment, or passion and impact but no payment, right? Like we're always trying
Right.
to make those puzzle pieces fit together.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But imposter syndrome,
Yes.
yes, I love to talk
Yes.
about this. Um, I hear a lot about imposter syndrome, but usually it's just about what it is and not so much on how to, I don't want to say overcome, because I think that's a misnomer too. I don't think we can actually get rid of it altogether, because as women and as people of color in this, I'm just going to say it, in this racist,
Mhm.
classist, sexist, capitalist society, we have been socialized to believe that we are lesser than. That's just the fact. That's the
Call a
fact.
thing a thing.
Um, and unfortunately, because of those messages, we grow up believing that we are lesser than, or that we're not enough, and have all of these doubts. And there's confirmation bias and there's stereotype threat. There's all of these things that we're battling when we are people of color and women, or any kind of minority. um, I use quotations because I don't like the word minority.
Right, me neither.
um, I'm glad we agree on that. And so
Absolutely.
how do you deal with imposter syndrome? um, First is acknowledging that it might never go away, and it's not about it going away, because I think there's also a little bit of power in that whole first only different identity, in recognizing that I am the only Latina in the room, or I am the only millennial, or I'm the only Black man in the room, or you know LGBTQ, whatever your first only different identity. The moment that you are in a room where you recognize that you're other, you can have that imposter syndrome reaction, and it can, you know, work against you, where you suddenly are tripping on words, you don't know what to say, you don't speak up. um, there's all of these ways in which it creeps in and it shows up, and it limits the way in which we show up in those spaces when we're the first, the only, or different. And so the key is to know when it's happening, to know what the triggers are. So when do you get triggered to the point where you start to doubt yourself and don't show up as your badass self?
Mm.
And then once you know what those triggers are, learning how to minimize those triggers. So there's breathing exercises that I recommend to my clients. There are ways to tap into your story again. So going back to first only different. So it's like, I'm in the room and I'm the only whatever in the room, but I'm here for a reason. So I'm going to show up and I'm going to give my insights because that's why I'm in the room.
Mm.
So some of that pep talk that you have to give yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about finding strategies to minimize them. And I think a lot of it comes with practice and with um, being in pushing yourself outside of your comfort zone and going to those limitations or those preconceived limitations. um yeah.
I like that.
Sorry, I froze
I
for a
no,
moment.
that's okay. It's okay. You were on a roll, and I think what I hear you saying is treat it like a syndrome, right? Like it's called a
Mhm,
syndrome for a reason, and that there might actually be. It sounds like there
mhm,
are some physical things that you can practice to try
mhm,
and squash
mhm.
the physical reaction that you're having to like an emotional state or a mental
Right.
state of being that you end up being in, right? It's interesting that when certain things happen, we give them value, right? If
Mhm,
something traumatic happens and you're scared, we value scared, right? But we
mhm,
don't value this kind of scared. Like nobody said
mhm,
anything to you. Why are you afraid? You know what I mean?
mhm.
Like you shouldn't be afraid. Nobody did anything to you. But if you're first only different, which I love that term that I just learned today, there are things that it's not the first time and it's associated with another time where you were first only different and something bad happened. And
Mhm,
so this idea of learning some coping mechanisms to help
mhm.
you get through until you feel strong enough to just ignore them, right? You're just like,
Right.
shut up, stupid imposter, you know, like
Yeah,
then
exactly.
then you just do whatever it is. You like pinch your hand under the table or you take a few
Mhm,
deep breaths before you say something, or you like drink a cup of coffee, like whatever it is that you need to do. But I
mhm,
like the idea that there's some concrete learned physical things you can do to help you get through this
mhm.
emotional state, which is what imposter syndrome feels like to me. It feels like an emotional
Yeah.
state.
That's exactly what it is. And part of it is reframing it. So changing your
Mhm.
mindset around it. So recognizing the triggers, knowing when it's happening, and also knowing what your typical reactions are to it. So it's like, I'm not gonna react that way, not today.
Not today.
Instead, instead leveraging those coping mechanisms to show up differently. And again, the more you show up in those spaces, it doesn't go away, but it certainly minimizes. And then
Mhm.
the times when it happens also get longer. So I might feel like an imposter this quarter, and the next time I have an episode of feeling like an imposter maybe won't be till next quarter. So the distance between the episodes is longer. But I don't think that it actually ever goes away because again, we're fighting a lot of socialization that is like deeply ingrained in our psychology.
Mhm. It's real. I
It's
don't have
real.
any other words to say except that it's real. But I'm glad that you think about it, and I can appreciate this lens that you're looking at it because oftentimes, and it's probably because you're a woman and you're a woman of color, right? You've
Mhm.
felt it before, and so you don't label it as something that's not real because you've never experienced it, which is what
Mhm.
I think tends to happen is that you look to someone who's an authority figure who may not have experienced it. So even though there's a word for it, they don't really believe
Mhm.
you when you say, they're
Mhm.
like, nobody told you that you shouldn't be in the room, so you shouldn't feel that way,
Right.
They don't say it like that, but that's exactly what you hear.
Mhm.
So I appreciate that you bring that lens to your coaching clients, right? And to the people in your program at your day job. I think it's why it's important for people who look like us, who look like you, who
Mhm.
have this sort of grasp on what it's like to be a first only different or a young person or a woman in these situations to help guide,
Right.
especially young people in their first job out of
Mhm.
college, right? So that you don't end up having to recover and
Mhm.
so you don't end up having to recover from a difficult experience of your first 10 years. You can sort of head in strong, right? You head in
Right.
knowing, having
Mhm.
some sense of what's going on so you can like block and tackle as your I hate athletic metaphors. There's like no reason for me to use them, but they're so easy. They're so easy, even though I don't know anything about football. Um,
No,
so
but what you're saying is so true. I think there are things that we experience that we think we're the problem, like there's
Mhm.
something wrong with me. And in talking about imposter syndrome, which is another coping mechanism, and finding communities and other people who experience the same thing for anything, it helps to validate the fact that this isn't an Angelis issue. This isn't a Candice issue. This is a societal issue. This is,
Mhm.
something bigger than us that we are all experiencing as a result of these gender norms, these, social norms. And so I think it's really important, like you said, to have community, to talk openly about these things, because otherwise we get in our heads and we think we're the problem, and then we spiral like, I'm not enough, I can't do this, how did I get here? Da, 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 boom,
Absolutely. I call it a
crash.
fear spiral. I call it a fear
Yeah.
spiral. And it's so easy. Like
Hmm.
once you get on that path, once you get on that ride, it is so easy
Yeah,
to just spiral out of control.
totally.
Can you talk a little bit? So we talked about imposter syndrome sort of generally, but can we talk about being women, right? We are both
Yes.
women, and oftentimes as women, they're just layers, right? Layers on layers on
Hmm.
layers.
Hmm.
Can you talk about how you encourage women of color to to step out, right? To lean in as is her name Sandra? Sam Stenberg or whatever her name is. Lean in, as people say, right?
Yeah.
How you encourage us to lean in when we are up against these societal
Hmm.
stereotypes and limitations that are set on us.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's no one size fits all, because
Mhm.
we're all different in our personalities, the challenges that we experience, our triggers, our ways of responding to stress, to stereotypes, to things like that. But I would say these are my three pearls. And I love to use the word pearls to indicate, here's like the gem,
Mhm.
or the key takeaway. And the first one is what I talked about today in my post, is owning your story. So it's easier to control the narrative when you reclaim your story, when you know what parts of your story you can bring into certain environments. And it can be very powerful because it gives you the advantage. So oftentimes we are made to believe that that difference is a disadvantage, but it's actually a really powerful and great advantage. And in
Mhm.
corporate America, they want more of that. There's
Mhm.
all of this study around diversity and its impact on innovation, and innovation impacts bottom line
Mm.
of a company, right?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so being very clear, again, knowing your story, owning your story, loving your story, and knowing what parts of it you can bring into work, to share different perspective, to share, a different way of looking at the world, a different way to solve, um, customers to solve for. So a lot of organizations, if they don't have the right people at the table, they're not creating products and services for people like us,
Mhm.
and so they're missing on a big chunk of the market. We have tremendous buying power as women. Women make financial buying decisions for households. Right? We have the
Mhm.
biggest buying power. So taking that identity and using it to your advantage, as opposed to thinking of it as a disadvantage. So owning your story is the first pearl. I would say the second pearl is tough, because as women we are socialized to shrink. Oftentimes,
Mhm.
in society, we are told to act like a lady. Depending on your cultural upbringing, it might even be worse because of machista culture and things like that. And so, um, we are socialized to reduce ourselves, essentially,
Mhm.
to be inferior, to be the peacekeepers. And so, my pearl for women is to not shrink, to expand, to own the room,
Mhm.
to take a stand against any sort of inequality or any sort of comments, in corporate America, in the workplace, where people are discriminating against women or around people of color. So don't shrink in the face of any of that adversity, or stereotype, or those challenges. Instead, learn how to, again, cope with those things. And you can do that in a very professional way. You can stop people in their tracks by simply asking a question like, Karen, what did you mean when you said
Mhm.
that?
Okay, tell me
um,
more. Tell me more about
right.
that. And then what next?
Mhm. Or by simply being vulnerable and saying, Karen, when you said that, it really made me feel as though, you weren't considering this. Or like from my perspective as a woman of color, these are the situations that I often find myself in, and this is why that comment made me uncomfortable. And oftentimes, unfortunately, people are functioning from their place of privilege, but also ignorance.
Mm,
And there's not always ill intent, and I'm not saying that we need to educate people, but I think we can start to bridge some of those gaps by just being honest and having those uncomfortable, vulnerable conversations to say, you know to a male colleague, like, that comment was a little off-putting, it sounded a little bit sexist, and here's
mm,
why.
mhm.
And because you have to coexist with these people, and
Right.
so you have to work with them, so you have to learn how to work with them instead of sitting,
Being
with
resentful.
anger, being
Mhm.
resentful, like all of these different things. Like, learn how to use your voice instead of shrinking.
I like it.
That's the second pearl. And then the last pearl is find your tribe. And like you said, lean in. You have to have other women around you who are badasses, who are going to remind you of how badass you are, and who are going to celebrate you when you win, who are going to uplift you when you need it most, and who, you know, own their story and are pursuing their purpose and their dreams, because just by virtue of them doing that, that's going to inspire and motivate you to get out of your shell, to get out of your way, to get out of your comfort zone. And so I think it's really important for women, and women of color especially, to bond, to support each other, to celebrate each other.
That's real. I think we often fall into a competitive spirit as opposed to a bonding connection, collaborative, right? It always feels like crabs in a barrel. And
Mm-hmm.
I really wish for a time where it doesn't have to feel that way, where we can collaboratively, that's how you say that word, um, work together, right? And if
Mm-hmm.
that's finding people who complement you in different ways, bring strengths that you don't have so that you can get better, and provide some support for them. There are ways for us to be complementary and to ignore
Mm-hmm.
the the version of us that is fed to us, right? Which is that
Mm-hmm.
whenever there are four women on set or the team is all women, that there's going to be cattiness, or there's going to be a fight,
Mm-hmm.
or someone was mad at
Mm-hmm.
someone, or someone stole somebody, right? Like that is every episode of every show that it's just
Mm-hmm.
always the story. Every team that is run by women, people try to come in and say that some
Mm-hmm.
stuff is going down because it's all women, right?
Yeah.
And this idea that you're saying is own your story and don't let other people direct the narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and be collaborative with the people around you, because that's how we all win. A friend I talked to earlier, she was like, we all have to eat, and
Mm-hmm.
working together is how we all eat.
Yeah. And to that point, the idea that if I win, you can't win comes from a scarcity mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to shift that to a growth mindset where we can both win, and we can
Mm-hmm.
both eat, and we can both be successful, and we
Mm-hmm.
can both get that promotion. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
so, you know, again, the know who your tribe is, find your tribe. There are still people like that, women like that, and just people
Mm-hmm.
in general that are petty, that don't want to see you win. And so stay away from them, but find the people find the people that are genuine and want to see you win, and
Mm-hmm.
stick to that tribe. So
I've heard you
I
call
think it's really
them.
important.
I've
Say again.
heard you call them your soul tribe. Is that who you're
Yes, my
talking
soul
about?
tribe.
I like
Hmm.
it. I like it.
I have my soul tribe, which are like my personal, like, best friends. They uplift me. Like, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, kind of soul tribe, right? And
Mm-hmm.
then my pop tribe, the Propel and Purpose tribe. So anyone who's a part of my community is part of the pop tribe.
I love that. And then as we close, if someone is listening and they're feeling
Hmm.
stuck, or fear, like paralyzed fear, I
Hmm.
always get into that point. You don't know what to do, and so then you're paralyzed. What should people do first if they know that they should be doing something, or they know that they're unhappy where they are and that they could be doing more? What's
Hmm.
your advice to someone on what to do first?
So by definition, being stuck and paralyzed literally means you're not moving.
Mm.
And so the best way to get unstuck is to do something, is to take action. So first, feel all the feelings, like get into your pity party. You know, we love to do that. Do it up, girl. Pop your champagne, get in your feelings, but give yourself time, you know, like a
Time
deadline.
limit.
Like I'm going to
Yeah.
be in my feelings for the next hour and I'm going to sulk and I'm going to complain, but then I'm going to stop and I'm going to create an action plan. I'm going to develop a strategy. And I might not have all the answers, but a strategy can simply be I'm going to do some research to see what my options are, or I'm
Mhm.
going to talk to the friend who isn't going to indulge in my complaints and my pity party, the friend who's going to give me like the real tough love that I need right now and say, hey, have you talked to this person? Have you, you know, gone on LinkedIn? Have you, you know, considered hiring a career coach? And this isn't a shameless plug, but I will say that we need to normalize paying for training and development. So like we will spend our coins on everything, right? Like
Mhm.
bags, shoes, the latest, you know, clothes, whatever, experiences. And yeah, absolutely. Like do whatever makes you happy. But then we keep second guessing ourselves about spending some money on our development, on our
Mhm.
growth. Maybe because we spent a lot of money going to college. I don't know what it is, but
Mhm.
I actually had a client who we were part of a group chat, and she didn't know that there was a career coach in the group chat, and she said, "Ladies, I'm, you know, I feel stuck, and I keep thinking about it. I keep thinking about it, but I haven't pulled the trigger, and I keep asking myself why. You know, like if I
Mhm.
want that expensive bag, I will get it. I won't even think twice about it."
Mhm.
And oftentimes, you know, sometimes people even buy the thing that they can't afford just, you know, because of instant gratification.
Mhm.
When you hire a coach or someone who's going to make you do the work, you know that that's what you're paying for. You're paying for a little bit of that pain to go through the work of uncovering all of these uncomfortable feelings that you're having. And so there's hesitation there, but also I think um we don't really look at the value proposition in
Mhm.
investing in ourselves, and that's really what it is. Like you need to invest in yourself, and I'm not saying you necessarily need to hire someone, a professional, but invest in yourself with time, invest in yourself with free resources, and again by leaning into your tribe, but the people who are going to give you advice that is sound advice, not let you indulge in the complaints and the pity party. And so again, feel all the feels, but literally in order to get unstuck, you have to take action. And action
Mhm.
is the fastest route to propelling out of that plateau. So you develop some kind of strategy, and it can be really simple. Like today, and I'm going to go on LinkedIn and I'm going to see who else is in this industry. What roles do they have? Or I'm going to journal and I'm going to reflect on all of the reasons why I'm unhappy, or all of the reasons why I feel like I need to go for a different job. Or I'm going to journal about what I really enjoy and then start that process of connecting the dots. I think that in connecting the dots and that self reflection is where you start to uncover, you know, what are the things that you're really good at? What are the things that bring you a lot of joy and meaning? And, you know, then you have to do some research to see what opportunities are out there. I find that a lot of clients and people that I talk to, they make assumptions about their opportunities and they automatically think like I can't do that, I can't shift in that direction, or
Mhm.
like, oh, no one's hiring right now. Like in the middle of COVID, so many people were like, no one's hiring, I'm not gonna go through this process right now. And it's like, I was just on LinkedIn and there were thousands of jobs that were still posted. Like
Yeah.
we're still hiring at my company. And then I had
Hiring,
a
buying houses, buying
right.
cars, like people are still doing stuff, buying all the Amazon things that are coming in the mail. I totally get
Hmm.
that.
Yeah. So, and I had a friend who I wrote a post and it said something like that. Don't be fooled. Like companies are still hiring, because I've had several friends who transitioned companies in the middle of COVID. And a couple of months later, she reached out. She said, you know, I remember this post vividly. And I thought, oh, I don't know about that. But, you know, I found myself really unhappy in this job that she had transitioned into. And she's like, and I decided, you know what? What's the worst that can happen? I'm gonna put feelers out there, and if I don't get any callbacks, I still have a job. But, if I do get some interviews and some opportunities, I can shift. And so
Mhm.
she did, and she landed a new job. And so she sent me a text and was like, thank you for putting that out there, because if I didn't see it, I wouldn't have thought I should, try.
Try. Yeah, the thing that ties, I mean, it always ties back to imposter syndrome and not thinking that you're worthy, right? The
Mm-hmm.
value in yourself. When talking about whether you should spend money on yourself in this way, we put value on the things that we buy to make ourselves look better or to feel better, like a massage or, like those kinds of emotional feeling better. I'm trying to make
Mm-hmm.
the distinction. I don't quite have the words for it, but there's a little bit in terms of like professional development and even in some like therapy that we
Mm-hmm.
don't think that we deserve it yet, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
I have to be an executive before I need career coaching. And
Right.
actually, you might need career coaching so you could get to be an executive, right? Like
Absolutely.
just
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not the principal doesn't mean that I'm not worthy of
Mm-hmm.
having a career coach or an
Mm-hmm.
executive coach or whatever the
Yeah.
kind of coach is. And
Yeah.
I think that people are afraid of two things, afraid of someone making them do the hard work to really like look internally. It's very
Mm-hmm.
easy to push that aside when you don't want to do it anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's also difficult believing that someone else can tell you something that you think you should be able to figure out for yourself. I think we
Mm-hmm.
rely heavily, maybe as women, as like I'm from a matriarchal family, right? You just like think you should be able to figure this out. You have what you need, even though you don't. And that these resources that we could use for these other things in the household should not be used on this thing that's just solely for me.
That's
So,
so spot on. That's so spot on. And that, I think, goes back to, I think it might be an actual concept, the minority mindset,
mm,
where we think we have to figure it out on our own.
mhm,
And some of that is because we've had to figure out a lot of things on our own. But this idea that people pull themselves by their bootstraps is a lie,
it's a
frankly. Like,
lie.
if
We
you
know
look
it's
at
a lie.
history, right? And if we look at our counterparts, uh, the concept of social capital is what comes to mind. So I
Mhm,
think that's the biggest differentiator between people of color and white people is access to social capital. And there's a ton of research on it. In fact, LinkedIn was founded on the concept of social capital and the snowball effect that happens with your close ties and your loose ties. And so we can be close ties because you're in my immediate network, and then someone else, and your ability to connect me to that other person, that
mhm,
loose tie, is how I expand my network and get to my next opportunity. There's
mhm,
tons of sociological research. Granovetter, I think, is the sociologist from Yale that's done research on it. And so access to social capital is the biggest differentiator. If you're a first gen graduate and you're a woman or a person of color, you likely have limited social capital. You don't have as much access because your families, your all of these things, right?
mhm.
There's that lack of that access. And because there's a lack of access, we're sort of, like you said, afraid to ask for help. And we think that we have to do it on our own, but it's bullshit. Like they're very much tapping into their resources and the people
Right.
that they know, and they're using their connections to get the internship, to get the job opportunity, to get their resume, to the recruiter's desk. And we have to do the same thing. We have to be able
Yeah.
to expand our social capital, our network, our tribe, and not be afraid to ask for a favor, for an opportunity, for a connection. That's really going to be the thing that makes the difference.
I love that, Angelis. And I love your energy. I
Oh, thank
feel
you.
like I thought I was doing something, but all of a sudden I feel like I could do even more. I really enjoy what you're bringing to the table, this lens that you're bringing to coaching, right? When I think about coaching, I think about like a old white man who's trying to tell me what to do or like
Mm-hmm.
like it just
Right.
I like this more accessible, and I don't mean that in any kind of negative way, but
No.
a more relatable, a
Mm-hmm.
more in real time, right? Based on what's really happening out there, acknowledging that we know that there are still some historical things that are, out in corporate America and out in the world that weigh heavy on our experience, but there's still ways that we can get through, right?
Yeah.
And so I really appreciate what you're bringing to the coaching world, to HR, right? To leadership development in the corporate setting, and then to the masses, right? Because this is what we do. Each one teach one, and
Mm-hmm.
we do that really well as women. We do that really well as women of color, and so I'm so proud of you, and so glad that you were able to come on tonight and share that.
Thank you.
I can think of like
Aw.
10 people that I'm going to send this to, like directly. Hey, I know that I want everybody to watch the show, but I want you to watch this show. So thank you so
Thank
much for
you.
coming
Oh my
on.
gosh, thank you. Thank you so, so much. And by the way, the thing that you said about coaching for executives is so real. That's exactly why when I launched a coaching business, I was like, I don't care about executive coaching, because if you're a person of color and a woman, it's really hard to get to the executive level. So I want
Mhm.
to help the people who are stuck in the middle
Yeah.
so they can get to those levels.
Yep.
And you're right, like it is accessible, it's there for us. And so I want to end with a quote from Elaine Welteroth's book More Than Enough, and she says, when the world tells you to shrink, expand. So keep
Wow.
expanding and keep popping.
Keep popping. And where can people find you if they are ready to propel? Where can they find you?
Oh, absolutely. So they can go on my website, propelonpurpose.com. They can book a free 30-minute consultation. They can check me out on Instagram, and they can follow me on LinkedIn. I don't really talk about my business on LinkedIn, but they can see my HR background and expertise on there.
Perfect. I love it. Oh, well, again, Anyelis, thank you so much for joining. And until next time.